Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Uncivil Law. I hope you're having a really great day as always, and we are here with a special guest who will be joining us in just a second. It's the CEO of Utreon, which is a YouTube alternative. There are several of these, of course, that have been popping up to varying degrees of success, and Utreon is one of them. A relatively recent company, was just founded in September of last year, based out of Toronto, and they are also trying to get into the space for YouTube alternatives, which is, as always, of increasing importance because YouTube can't decide, what it likes better. Do they like having people, or do they like having strict rules? And apparently the rules are winning out these days because, as we well know, YouTube just announced a new policy as of yesterday that any channel or any video that defies the one true truth that there was no fraud in the election will be banned. 8,000 channels have been banned by YouTube since September of this year for election misleading or whatever else they are accusing them of. And of course, it's not the first time we've seen purges on YouTube or other platforms where YouTube and other platforms are taking down people for various versions of wrongthink, because we can't have any of that. So it is as important as ever that there be competitors to YouTube. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have the CEO of one of these services, Utreon, come on, talk a little bit about his service, talk a little bit about other services, what the state of YouTube competitors is, so that we all can figure out what's going on. So without further ado, let me introduce my guest. This is Edward Brower, the CEO of Utreon, who has nothing better to do than talk to me. How are you doing, Edward?
Good, yeah.
I'm doing fantastic. Yeah. So I think people are as concerned as ever with YouTube striking down channels for various reasons. Their guidelines have for long times been vague, open-ended, subject to whims and capricious action, it seems. They very rarely come forward with any clarifications. And then when they do come forward with clarifications, it's all just bad news. So when they do clarify, it's to clarify that we're going to harm you more. So the latest clarification was from YouTube: we're going to take down any channel or any video that dares to say there might have been election fraud or problems that led to mistakes in the 2020 election, in the US presidential election, because, heaven forbid we have any wrongthink,
Yeah. It's with YouTube, it's just been, one shoe drops after the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, as we were also talking about off stream, the thing that's sort of bewildering about the whole thing is, what problem are they really trying to solve? Because YouTube themselves say 90% of views relating to the election come from the top 10% of creators, the major networks. And that's not really surprising. That's what's called a Pareto distribution, the 80-20 rule or the 90-10 rule, that you have the vast majority of things come from a very small subset. So the idea that 10% of the channels are 90% of the traffic is not surprising. And then it's like, okay, if that's true, what problem are you trying to solve? Because all these other channels are so small, why even bother? But I guess it's just about control, because what else could it be?
Yeah, it's kind of like they're trying to get the stragglers. But the thing with the Pareto distribution is they've probably inverted it. So what they've actually recently said, they're not hiding the fact that they're using the algorithm to selectively boost anymore.
Sure.
They're actually boasting about it. And probably what's happened is, the news on the election that organically, without intervention, would have, been that 80 versus 20, probably would have been the opposite. But they've actually inverted it, which is interesting.
Yeah, it is certainly interesting. So, because YouTube has become such a dominant market competitor, at this point, there are, of course, other services. Some of those are other big market competitors, Facebook and Twitch and other ones like that. But, YouTube was once a small company too. They were once long ago, they were a company with one video, from someone filming their day at the zoo, was, I believe, the very first video on YouTube, if memory serves correctly. And, other services have likewise had very small, Facebook was originally an internal thing for students at Harvard. Microsoft, of course, once started, and, even like Starbucks and Walmart, at one point they had one store and were but a dream. So, who knows what the dream of today will be. So, and also we've seen, of course, big companies fail over time. Before the companies of today, there were MySpace and Friendster, and There were other sites before that, and there will probably be sites beyond whatever takes over the place from YouTube. So, this is part of the eternal truth. So it's good for, if no other reason than to keep them honest. So why don't you tell me a little bit about your company and what you're hoping to do in this space to, to fix weaknesses in what YouTube is doing, fix their problems, and solve issues that they're not solving, and also helping to keep them honest. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah. So when you're talking about, obviously they were a smaller company, and you have a lot of these companies that, obviously they started small. Facebook comes to mind. And, you had giants that actually fell, like MySpace. The way we kind of think of it is YouTube is a MySpace looking for its Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
So we're hoping to be that Facebook. In terms of YouTube themselves, so obviously we've done a lot of market research and trying to look into what is actually happening behind the scenes. These are all just guesses based on what we see and the behaviors we see empirically, and it kind of looks to us as though YouTube, they started as user-generated content. And if you look at user-generated content, and this is excluding Asia, they're like 88%. They were almost 100% before Twitch came on. Twitch is like 9%. But that's not the pie chart that YouTube looks at. They look at video as a whole. And when you do that, it looks more like YouTube is 35%, Netflix is 46%. And if you look at profitability, it's even more tilted towards Netflix. So YouTube, it looks to us, and everything they're doing looks to us like they're trying to go towards corporate content. They're trying to be more like a Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
So everything we're seeing is coherent with what looks to be like them throwing off the user-generated content market. And that's basically what we see. In terms of actually competing with YouTube, what we're trying to do is, we're actually the newest of the video platforms that have popped up to compete against it. And what we're looking to do is, be the first credible, well-executed platform that can actually be the competitor that does compete across the board and actually succeeds at doing so. And, there are a bunch of other competitors sort of looking at those. There's various issues with what they're doing. In some cases, they think they're competing with YouTube. They're not actually. In some cases, they might not even understand that. But yeah, we're looking to actually be a credible competitor. And we're looking to do that across a few things. So in terms of the tech stack, you look at YouTube, you can kind of tell different parts of the site, which part of the last 2 decades it was coded in. Mm-hmm. So they have a lot of technical debt in terms of, it's just a sprawling product. So what we're doing is, first of all, it's a very modern implementation, a modern video platform. So we're working on just getting that right, just actually beating it as a product. We don't see it as good enough to be, okay, we're the alternate, we're the same thing, or we're just not as good. We're trying to actually beat it in terms of feature set. And then there's, I think the main thing we're working on is credibility. It's a key, for us, that's sort of a key metric. And it's something that, we just always talk about in terms of, how we're planning things out. YouTube has a credibility problem. So, when they had the first adpocalypse, that really just destroyed their credibility of creators in terms of monetization. It took them years to actually implement a membership system. Mm-hmm. And when they did, most people don't use it because they don't want Google or YouTube to control their revenues. So where YouTube has a credibility problem, our goal is to actually create a platform that businesses can actually count on and that has credibility and kind of allows them to do monetization actually through the platform they deliver their video on. And then in terms of actual rules and moderation, we're working on ways to actually credibly moderate a website like this at scale. And we can go more into that.
Fair enough. So when you say credibility, my first thing that pops into my mind is credible to who? Because I think some of this is just creep. You start out with one mission or one focus or one thing, and you change over time. So like mission creep or scope creep, things like that. So I think your summary of where YouTube was originally as a user created platform, and there was really no major institutional players on YouTube, and there wasn't for a very very long time really of any note. And then I think in part because they weren't profitable, and to the best of my knowledge still aren't profitable. I still think they're operating at a loss to the best of my knowledge. They wanted to bring in bigger institutional players who had bigger checkbooks, and then those players for various institutional reasons, big companies and big institutions tend to be very small conservative in a lot of ways. They like things the way that they are, for their own prudential reasons, for better or worse, whatever the underlying rationale might be. They're in a position of power and prominence, and they are not particularly inclined to give that up for any reason. And so they are concerned about challengers, and they're also concerned about voices that might be not favorable being heard because it might pollute their legitimacy. So if NBC, for example, just to pick a random name, was on YouTube with everyone in sight, that might hurt NBC's brand in some part, because even if they're just doing what NBC does, because they're affiliated with the unwashed, it might hurt them. So when you say credibility, credibility to who in light of all that stuff I just said?
So credibility to creators. So what's going to happen is going to be largely creator driven.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of the problems with YouTube are a result. Well, there's a lot of factors. One big one is actually the fact that they're owned by Google. And so what that means is that YouTube is always subordinate to Google's interests. So what people have to understand about 2016, when you had the apocalypse, what you had is, so one thing about YouTube is they grew so big so fast that they sort of have to solve everything at scale with machine learning. There's no other way for them. And the problem with machine learning is that, it can get it 97% correct, but when it fails hard. So one story I like to tell in terms of explaining machine learning, there's this group that was training a neural network to recognize cows in a field. And so they, kept feeding it a data set. It worked really well. And at some point it just started failing. And they were trying to figure out, why was this neural network that was working so well, why is it failing now? And they looked into it, and it turns out that it wasn't detecting cows. It was actually detecting green grass and blue skies.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So the problem with machine learning is they don't even know what it's doing. And that's how they have to run everything, for moderation, for absolutely everything. So we're in a situation where YouTube is running everything by algorithm, and it has a lot of mistakes happen. And then you have the fact that they're completely subordinate to Google. In terms of ads, so you had in the adpocalypse, let's say you have Coca-Cola and Disney running ads, and you had ads that were just played on videos that aren't suitable for those brands. And, they have no real way, because they don't really have good metadata. If you've seen a YouTube channel video description, it's basically a dumpster fire. The data's not structured. It's like, here's what's in my video, here's some links, here's my credits, here's some info about my channel, and it's all random, jumbled. So again, they have to sort of use they have to use machine learning to even know what's in their videos, which is a problem for them. So anyways, you had Coca-Cola, let's say, juxtaposed with something that's not great with the brand. It led to an advertiser boycott, not of YouTube, but of all of AdSense, which is, if people don't know this, Google is an advertising company. They're not a search company. So at first they sort of called their bluff. They said, okay, well, you guys aren't going to stop advertising forever. And then a month went on, and then they realized they had to pull the lever, and take down, monetization, let's say across half of YouTube or something. So that's sort of what happened in 2016. And you have companies like Patreon that sort of were very well placed at the time. They were a very small company started in 2013, but they were at the right time, right moment. But that's just an example of how YouTube is just completely subordinate to Google's interests. So, in every case, it's just going to be, okay, we, sacrifice YouTube and therefore sacrifice sacrifice creators. So in terms of credibility of YouTube, creators inherently know that they're just always going to be on the altar.
I think they know that now. I think especially after 2016 and being, and not necessarily the first, but one of the major ones with this major episode. And one of the things that I don't know that there's necessarily a good answer for this on any level, but I'll ask the question anyway. I think probably it's true that YouTube and Patreon and everyone else for that matter probably started with good intentions and hopes and, don't be evil, as Google said, although apparently they got rid of that motto because of, they want to do defense work and all that rest of it. But, the point being that they probably all start with good intentions. And I appreciate your intentions and, I believe you. But, whatever fate befall them or whatever pressures or whatever issues cause them to end up where they are, I imagine those are not unique or unrepeated pressures. And I don't know that those pressures are on you today, and maybe they won't be on you for 5 years, but whatever they were probably are going to be there again. So I don't know if there's a good answer for how are you going to avoid that problem, because, maybe the problem isn't even definable at some level, but I'll ask it anyway. How are you going to avoid that problem?
Yeah. So it actually is a problem that it's kind of like, there's no complete solution that's all, going to solve, for example, politics forever, right? You're always going to have, let's say, two sides, and they're always going to be duking it out. And, you're not going to keep your constitution if you never fight for it. That's just sort of an eternal battle type thing. So when things ultimately come down to, what if the owners are completely swapped and you have new owners that have completely different motives? Well, that's sort of unavoidable. Ultimately the ultimate safeguard is just competition. So
yeah, I think that's right.
Happening right now. So that's sort of the big picture, like the answer you would give, across decades. Like if we get really big and 20 years, things aren't great. Well, hopefully they'll be, the same thing will happen, rinse, repeat. But in terms of the short, medium, long term, the solution we sort of come up with is, we're not trying to look at things as like, okay, here's a goal and let's get that goal. We're thinking in terms of systems. So when you want to create credibility, you have to think in terms of systems. So one of the big things is algorithms and also moderation. And ultimately, that's what the problem is with a lot of things. And then there's metadata that comes in with advertising. So the way we sort of solve the credibility problem with moderation is, so Google, because they grew so big so fast, everything is done through machine learning. And obviously you have the error rate that I was talking about. You also have the opacity of the algorithms. Nobody really knows how they work, other than some engineers probably fiddle with it all the time.
Maybe them. Yeah.
People in that company know how it works, but you probably have segmented information. In terms of us, to create credibility, we just have to be transparent about how things work.
Sure.
And in terms of moderation, the way you train a neural network. So what Google does is they have a neural network, and the way they train it is they give it some inputs, and then based on the results, if it's more towards what they want, they promote that, and then they keep running it on the path that went towards what they want. And if they get a result that's away from what they want, they sort of get rid of that. So it's almost an evolutionary system how neural networks work. So they're basically teaching machines at scale to moderate for them. Our take is we can actually teach our users at scale to moderate for us. So we have a set of rules. You can flag anything on the platform, you cite the rule, and then if you pass a certain threshold, depending on what the rule is, it'll sort of create a case. And we have something called a judgment score for every user. And if you flag something and that is never appealed, it's a proper flag, it sort of survives, you get a judgment point, or your score increases. If what you flagged eventually gets overturned through appeal, you lose your judgment score. So it's already training you towards applying the rules properly. And then the weight of your flag is based on your judgment score. So flag properly and you get more score, you have more weight in the system. And the appeal system is sort of what makes that work. So you sort of have a runaway process where, if you look at Reddit, a small number of people control, most of the subreddit.
Disturbingly small. For as many Reddit communities there are, the number of moderators is it's disturbingly small.
Yeah. So the way we avoid that system, like a runaway culture, or where you basically have a capture of a small group taking over the system, is we have a few rounds of appeal. And the way appeals work is if you disagree, you actually cite why you think this rule is being misapplied. We actually convene a jury of users, of your peers, and they will actually vote. You can appeal a few times. And at the top, it actually goes to a committee, a rules committee run by the Utreon staff.
Cool.
So the goal there is actually to essentially train the users that are interested in moderating to actually moderate based on what we like, what the rules are, the way we would like them to enforce the rules at a high level. So it's basically a training system. It's like it's like what Google does, but we're actually having human judgment. That 3% where it just doesn't really work properly at all, we're avoiding that.
Fair enough. So that sounds promising, where you're using the users' moderation of each other and their moderation of the moderation to score how they're doing. So so it's all essentially democratized. It all gets self-checked by the users, or that's at least what I understood.
Yeah, I mean it's essentially modeled off the the U.S. appellate system, and then you go to the Supreme Court type thing. And it also lets us create tools that are going to be very useful. So, for example, ranking the rules by the false positive rate. How often is Rule 12 misapplied? If you have a rule that's essentially misapplied, let's say 30-40% of the time, there might be a problem with the rule. So actually creating a way for people even people with high judgment score, to actually propose revisions to rules and actually have access to that data and just be very transparent about it. And also, when we actually render a judgment at any level, actually having comments where sort of the decision is explained, so that a lot of the problems with the credibility is nobody knows what's going on at YouTube. You get a cryptic email telling you did something wrong, but not telling you what you did wrong.
Yeah, and just go see our rules. Go see our frequently asked questions. That definitely is helpful to me, because I've read that before, and now I was like, what exactly am I doing? Yeah, it's a pain in the butt.
Yeah, Kafkaesque is the term.
That's one way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. So the goal is to everything's just about creating credibility. And some creators ask us, oh, but the rule committee is at the top of the thing. It's like, well, yeah, obviously, eventually it has to hit that point. The goal is to just create a process, a system that has the maximum amount of credibility, and that's the best anyone can do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that makes a lot of sense for your company and what you're trying to set up. And also, I wanted to also bring up from our pre-discussion how you are trying to deal with the monetization on the users, because we were talking about how in the case of YouTube, and you mentioned this a little obliquely, but I think I'd like to spend a little more time on it, how in the case of YouTube, they were late to the game in coming up with a membership system. And a lot of people aren't using that. And a lot of people are using Patreon or Subscribestar or other services like that to get revenue. And that has problems because you have to send people somewhere else, and that requires more steps. So it reduces, the throughput, and reduces the amount, every time you put a step in someone's way, more people will drop off. So one of the things that you were trying to do, and please feel free to correct me with this characterization, try to do something Twitch-like where people can subscribe for some monthly fee, and then they would get a portion of that. And so I was hoping you could speak a little bit more to how that monetization system is working, where you think the advantages are, and Twitch is the best analogy I've seen. So how it might be, maybe it compares or differs from Twitch, and how that is assisting users in that domain.
Yeah, so we implemented sort of a Twitch-like system. So first of all, it's a general platform. It's open to everybody. You have videos that are open to everybody. But what people want to do to monetize is have extra content that's available to their subscribers. To clarify one thing, YouTube uses the term subscriber instead of follow. Most platforms say follow. So they had to call their subscription system membership. So we're talking in terms of following and subscribing. So we make it possible, just like on Twitch, you have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 level subscriptions. And you can sort of give differential access to certain extra videos to your subscribers. But the key there, and part of our goal was, the optimal system is where the monetization is in the delivery platform.
Right.
So, Patreon takes a much smaller amounts, let's say 10% on average. That's because everyone knows they're not delivering the video. And a lot of people are doing an end run around YouTube because, they just destroy their goodwill with the adpocalypse stuff. And the problem with doing the end run is, you have a lower percentage that Patreon is taking, but the conversion step in terms of sending people to Patreon is huge. So you're just losing all of that and more probably on sending people to a third party. So the ideal system is one in which you can actually trust the platform you're on and monetize through the platform you're on. So that's what we're actually building. So we have subscriptions that are available on any channel that enables them. Right now we're doing a 75-25 split. YouTube does, I think, 70-30. Twitch does between 50-50, and they do less with some people that do much better, obviously. So yeah, we're, in terms of subscriptions, that's what we did. It's competitive with everything. And yeah, so Patreon it's a workaround solution, but it's not the optimum solution.
Okay, fair enough. So I think that explains your company model, and what you're trying to do. So I thought maybe next we could talk a little bit about the general state of YouTube alternatives that are out there who are trying to do a variety of things. So the ones that come most notably to mind are Parler, and because it may be the most notable free speech platform of late. There's BitChute, which has some issues there because they don't allow monetization. There's Rumble, which I'm not that familiar with. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. And you could also talk about other services that are out there. So what is the state of other competitors in sort of your general tier of services? What are they doing well? What aren't they doing well? What do you think? I'm tempted to use really geeky phrase like unique value proposition, but that seems like such a geeky thing to do. But what is it you think that you are doing that's better or different than some of these other competitors I mentioned? Or maybe competitor isn't the right word, other compatriots in the cause. How about that?
Yeah, so let's start with, I guess we'll talk about Rumble. My understanding is that they started off as a player, an embed player, with monetization options. And they sort of evolved it to a platform. They got Bongino on, and they started taking off a bit with the political stuff recently. They do have, backlinks and views and stuff like that. My understanding is it's mostly from the embed players, but maybe not at this point. I don't know. They're definitely a platform that's doing okay right now. Parler is doing very well in terms of being a Twitter alternative. They would fall in the right moment, right place. So you've had a few different attempts at this. You had Gab, and that kind of brings us to the BitChute stuff. So part of one of the thesis problems, I would say, with a few of these companies, and let's mainly talk about BitChute, I guess, is they perceive the problem with YouTube as being censorship as such, which isn't necessarily correct. Like, for example, you have a whole category set, which is, they're subordinate to Google. That's a problem. That's not related to censorship as such. It probably results in censorship effectively, but it's not an actual conceptual problem. And so because they perceive the problem as being censorship, they sort of reach this non sequitur, which is, okay, well, the solution is obviously the opposite, which is total free speech. We don't get a court order telling us to take this down. It's on the front page. So the end result is a lot of these platforms think they're competing with Google about across the board, but they're actually not. They will never have advertising. A lot of channels are not going to want to be on there. A lot of creators are not going to be on there. A lot of users aren't going to want to be on there. Now, it's not to say there isn't a place for those kinds of services. It's just they're not competing with YouTube. So, for example, Gab, because of how they were doing, free speech, absolute free speech, they sort of came to a situation where Apple kicked them off for not following Apple's rules. Now, Apple has some censorship. And so because they were not complying with what Apple wanted, they were kicked off the App Store, and then they were kicked off Google Play. So that's a big problem for them. What Parler probably does right is they're sort of avoiding those problems by actually complying with Apple's rules. The way we actually think of these things is, and obviously we've thought about it, is it's not just the app stores. There's entire jurisdictions that are going to have different rules. So the way we approach this is, we're not going to change the law in the People's Republic of China. China wants to block something. Okay, fine, they can block it. But in terms of credibility, we can make it just say, it's not available in China, but if you try to access something from another country, you can say blocked in the PRC. And you can cite the rule or law that they use to justify their blocking. If something is not available through the App Store, we can do the same thing on the web. It'll not be on the App Store on the iOS app, but on the actual website, you can actually click an audit button, let's say, and see, okay, it's been blocked by Apple. Here's their App Store rule. So we can't change Apple's policies. We can't change China's policies. But what we can do is just be credible about it and just, give you an audit trail. So that's sort of how we sort of see the problem of dealing with censorship across different jurisdictions. Whereas those platforms tend to have a problem. So that's sort of where I see BitChute, Gab type thing. But yeah, Parler is doing well with Twitter type stuff, obviously. There's Library, which is more general. They kind of had the BitChute problem, but there's Odyssey now, which is another competitor. So built on top of Library. So it looks like they're sort of solving those problems as well. But yeah, there's some of these platforms are better run than others, and we're looking obviously to be the best.
So in terms of where revenue to the user or to the content creator would be coming from, some of these are using YouTube probably being the most dominant, and some are using user subscriptions. Also, YouTube to a lesser degree. Some are using both. So from what my understanding is, principally right now, you're relying on user subscriptions, or what YouTube would call membership, rather than ad revenue. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, we have subscriptions right now. We're going to implement Twitch style microtransactions.
Sure.
So tipping, I guess you could call it. So we're looking to implement that relatively soon. And the other thing we're looking to build is an actual ad platform where advertisers and creators can actually, have a bid ask on their inventory. And part of what's going to make that really good is We've actually implemented a content rating system. So a lot of what on the technical side, what we're doing better than YouTube is just having better structured metadata, structured inputs. So we actually, so let's just go back to YouTube. YouTube recently rolled out, they ask you what's in your video. And they sort of, they have a questionnaire.
I hate that thing so much because I never know how to answer the last question, which is the one I always get tripped up on, which is, does it deal with controversial content? And because the way they write it, it's like so open-ended. And a fair number of my videos get tripped up on that. Because like, does it deal with terrorism? It gives a long list of these creative horribles, and then it ends with other controversial subjects. And I get tripped up on that. For example, heaven forbid, I do a case involving family law with a man who wins, which does occasionally happen. I've had those videos demonetized. So the other controversial subject area apparently covers a lot of territory. So I hate that question very much.
Well, that's your wild card catch-all.
Yeah. That's the problem for me, because it's like, I don't know what that is, and neither do you. It's whatever you want it to be. So not so great.
Yeah. Now the interesting thing is, okay, it's good that YouTube is starting to ask questions, but the problem is, what are they doing with it? All they're doing with that information is they're putting you in one of three buckets: full monetization, limited, or none. So they're not even telling the advertisers what's in your video. They don't even tell advertisers anything. For advertisers, it's kind of like you went on a blind date and you don't even know who you went out with. So it's a problem. So part of what we're doing with metadata is by having a really good content rating system, where we're not telling you like, tell us the rating of your video. We're not doing that. We're saying, do you have adult language, and we give certain levels and metrics by which you can kind of reasonably judge these things. And so we actually ask you exactly what's in the video, and you can save these as preset so you don't have to do it every time. We actually ask what's exactly in it, then we generate content descriptors, kind of like HBO. You watch a thing and it's like adult language, AL. We have the same thing. And we actually, using those descriptors or those specific indicators, we generate an age for the video. And then that's just metadata that's going to be very useful when we have advertisers, where we can say, okay, you can, filter by whatever you want. You can find any sort of topic. You can find, you can actually have access to metrics on these channels. And, you can say, okay, well, I'm a beer company. I'm fine with, little, bad language, let's say, whereas Disney would not, which is fair. So what we're trying to do is actually make it so the advertiser knows what's in the video. So if you actually look at our rules, rule number 1 is, mislabeling is actually the worst infraction. Tell us, like, don't mislabel your stuff. So we're actually putting a lot of focus on metadata and integrity of that metadata.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So one of the other things that was coming to mind as you were describing the payment methodologies that you have and how you're doing this with users being supported is that there are a few competitors out there trying to do some distributed social networks, open social networks, trying to solve some of these problems by avoiding companies altogether. Minds.com is an example of at least one that's trying to do around the space to some success. I think they've got like 2 million users trying to do it as a distributed social network to avoid it. Now that does come with problems. The benefit of lack of centralized control is exactly the peril of lack of centralized control. That you can't, you run into risks of people running all kinds of content and all that. Now, some of the things you were talking about earlier in terms of the users democratizing and dealing with the rules, presumably can deal with some of that, because users will, like content they don't or not. So how does your service compare at all with these distributed or open social networks, if that's a fair question?
Yeah, so we did, when we started, we did sort of examine the idea of decentralization. Obviously, with Bitcoin, that's been sort of a popular way to go, or direction, especially with very technically adept people, and you sort of have these platforms that are talking about decentralization and everything's using a token, a Bitcoin, an Ethereum token, and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff that just makes regular users roll their eyes. Um,
It's a little too geeky even for me, to be quite honest.
yeah, like when we go on some of these platforms and we see they're talking about like tokens and Bitcoin and stuff like that, it's like, okay, well, they're the crypto network, which is fine. Again, that's a niche. That's not competing across the board. So the idea sounds good. You're decentralizing, so it solves the problem of one person controlling everything. Good. The main reason, the main thing that's kind of interesting for new platforms is the idea of not having to pay for all the bandwidth, because that's really,
that's a problem.
That's a big
Yeah,
problem.
all that computing power, all that bandwidth. I mean, I don't know how much traffic Google moves, but it's a big number. Lots, all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's storing, there's transcoding,
Yeah.
there's transmitting. There's a lot of expense, and the distributed stuff is actually it's actually more a solution for that, because so it's just more of a business model type decision. Now, if you actually look empirically at companies that have tried this, so if you look at Library, or you look at BitChute, so BitChute started using technology called web torrents, I think, and the idea is, you're watching this video, someone else is watching the video. Well, why doesn't that person just send the video to the other person? And you can have a lot of people doing this. And when you have a lot of nodes in the network, you can essentially run a network without having to front all the bandwidth yourself. Now, in practice, what we find is that the seed, which is the original video transmission for all these platforms, it's always a BitChute server is seeding it, or the library is paying for a server that's seeding. It's being seeded on Odyssey, and in practice, it's not even a Pareto distribution. It's two orders of one. They're probably seeding 99% of everything, or more than that, I would say. In practice, it's not solving for that, and in practice, they're seeding the whole thing. So there is no distributed network in practice. And then you have the issue of, well, you control your front end. So, Library runs library.com, Odyssey runs odyssey.com. There could be a decentralized network behind everything, but they're obviously deciding what's on their front end. They could block anything.
Sure.
And then if it's like, okay, well, go form your own front end. Yeah, theoretically you could do it. I mean, it's not something.
Theoretically, you are doing it, right?
Well, we're not on those networks.
Well, yeah, but I mean, in terms of starting a competitor, like go roll your own. I mean, there are people out there who are doing that, right?
Yeah. So in theory, someone could be displeased with how Odyssey or BitChute works and start creating their own front end. In practice, if you have one of those competitors that's piggybacking off of Library's video network, or piggybacking off of BitChute's video network, in practice, I wouldn't be surprised to see them shut off the tap pretty soon. They're just shipping money at that point.
Yeah.
So it's not something that's not worth trying. It's just there's cons that have to be thought out.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this discussion is, to me, just a big discussion of there's no free lunch. There's not a lot free. You have to make decisions one way or another. Centralized control comes with costs and benefits. Leaving it open comes with costs and benefits. Letting it be completely unmoderated, we're basically turning into a Chan board, which can be advantageous depending on your point of view, or not depending on your point of view. But then we worry about the institutional actors just taking over, because the internet was, or at least was, I'm old enough to remember because I was born in 81. So I was using computers pretty early. So I was there in the early days of the internet before it really popped off, before there really was an internet, back when we were doing bulletin boards, old school stuff.
Your algorithm.
Yeah. Of course, stuff. Exactly. That's right. Yeah. Back when we were doing command lines, and Netscape was the brand new browser on the block, because that's how old school we are. Anyways, but yeah, the great hope or the great thing was it was going to be this democratization, and I think to a large degree that has happened and remains true even in the current reality. Because I mean, if we compare it to, there are 3 TV stations that exist that are broadcasting TV kind of days. You know, we're a long way from the only source being Walter Cronkite, as controlled as things are. But I think people are justly concerned about things heading in that direction as we see more institutional players taking over the YouTubes and things like that. And so that's a big concern. The other, that was more philosophy. For a question though, for me as a creator, for anyone as a creator for that matter, you know, who started on YouTube and has had some success there, and I want to hedge my bets because I'm concerned. I have opened up a Utreon account, which I'm using to back up my videos for now. But you know, in terms of trying to figure out where to spend my time as a creator, and I guess I could invest in everywhere and just upload everything everywhere. That would take some time. So should I pick one? Should I pick a lot? You know, how am I, or how is any creator for that matter, to choose which of the many services? Or is it just, you know, we make the best bets we can and hope it works out in the end, which is probably the right answer.
So think in terms of distribution channels.
Sure.
So our goal, so one of the things we're working on is, so first of all, we're mostly a white glove service for a lot of creators. We take care of importing their stuff. We even have someone on our staff whose only job is to improve metadata. So for example, if your channel description is full of your, you know, if every video has your Twitter link for your channel, we're just going to put a Twitter icon on all your videos. So you just don't have that polluting your descriptions. So we're actually doing a lot of stuff like that. And that's just part of what we're doing with metadata. And yeah, we're actually trying to make everything frictionless so that it's not a lot of work to be on Utreon.
Mm-hmm.
We take care of the heavy lifting for you. You literally just sign up, tell us what your username is, and boom, we'll take care of everything. So removing all the friction, that's one thing we're doing. But in terms of a strategy, we don't want our creators to get rid of their YouTube channels while they still have them, let's say. Because for us, that's a distribution channel. For us, that's actually a funnel. So people that are watching on YouTube, if the creators say, hey, I'm also available on Utreon, you have all these different features. Let's say you have subscriptions enabled on Utreon. If you really like this, subscribe on Utreon, you'll have access to our extra stuff. Videos for tier 1 subscribers or something like that, for example. Mm-hmm. That's one way to sort of get people onto Utreon and use the subscription system to monetize on Utreon. And so, yeah, like YouTube we want that to be kept as a funnel. What we're working to do in terms of the metadata is by having the metadata on Utreon be so much better than YouTube. Just for example, let's say you have a medical channel and you're giving presentations. You know, this is a cardiology presentation. We make it so, okay, tell us who the presenter is who's speaking, tell us the year, give us a bunch of this metadata, and we're going to intelligently display this. So when you're scrolling through the channel, you can actually see the presenter and the year under because it's a presentation. So the front end can actually display this stuff intelligently. Or if this is a show, you know, we let you actually create a show instead of just having playlists. And you can have seasons in the shows. And you can have episode numbers and season numbers, and we actually do that stuff intelligently.
Oh my God, maybe I'll have to start dividing my stuff into seasons. That'll be fun. This is season 14 of Uncivil Law. What will be revealed this season? That could be interesting, yeah.
Well, you should see Virtual Legality by Hoglaw. We have him on. And
I am familiar with him, and I keep reaching out to him to try to do a thing with me, and he's not really great with following up with me, but I will get you yet, Richard. I will get you yet. But tell me more about what Hoglaw is doing. He's a good guy.
So he has Virtual Legality, which is, so he's sort of created the show. So you go on his channel, you see Virtual Legality, and every episode has an episode number. And part of what the member of our staff, Julia, who does all the metadata, you know, she will take the episode number and Virtual Legality out of the title and put it into the metadata so that you have nice, clean titles. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of this weird thing where, you know, YouTube has presumably unlimited resources. They haven't been able to do something that simple. In fact, if you want to have a thumbnail for a playlist on YouTube, you have to make a dummy video with a cover top of the playlist, and that's how you have cover art for playlists. That's ridiculous. We make it so you can just have cover art for a show or even a season. So yeah, that's part of the improving stuff and just improving, all the metadata. Wrap us back. Where were we? How do we get to metadata?
No, we were just talking about man, where were we? Because we're talking about just I don't even remember. I'm sorry. We're talking about Hogue Law. We're talking about Richard Hogue and the episode numbers and the season numbers and things like that. That's how we got into that discussion.
Yeah, we were talking about just having better metadata. Oh yeah. Okay, I got it. So having better metadata is sort of what's going to let us. So one of the things we're working on is implementing push to YouTube. So we don't just want to be able to fetch videos from YouTube. We want to be able to actually push to YouTube. So you publish first on Utreon. You enter all your metadata, like structured data. So tell us the year, tell us the presenters, tell us the episode number, tell us the music artist. Give us all this really good data. And then on a template, we'll actually push to YouTube for you, because we'll make it so you can link your YouTube channel. And it'll just render all that onto YouTube. So the idea is to have people regard their channel library on Utreon as the gold master.
Fair enough.
And then push that to YouTube, and then YouTube's a great funnel for us. So in terms of strategies for content creators and sort of hedging their bets against YouTube, try to go everywhere where it's easy, where there's no friction. But yeah, it's obviously we think we're doing the best job at sort of going towards this, and we think we have the most coherent vision of how this can work. But I think I think library will import, depending on how many subscribers you have, I think they'll import for you a number of videos under a certain length. And I think if you email them, they'll consider special requests or situations. But yeah, our goal is to just have the most comprehensive system at doing this.
Yeah, and one of the other things that someone mentioned, because they mentioned float plane, and it brought to mind that one of the other solutions that some creators have attempted to explore around this domain is these quasi-closed networks with revenue sharing. So Nebula being another one, which I don't know much about, except Legal Eagle apparently is a member. So, that's a strike against Nebula, right? And then float plane, which was started by Linus Tech Tips. And as I vaguely understand them, they are services in both cases where if you become a member, you get a revenue share, and we don't censor and we don't have to worry about that. So are those kinds of services answers at all to some of these problems? And how does those kind of things? Because I don't think it's comparable for at least the reasons because they're so kind of closed. So I don't know if it's a fair comparison, but I figured since someone mentioned float plane, I could at least ask how it compares to those kinds of alternatives that are trying to be developed as well.
Yeah, so they fall in the category of indirect competitors at best. They're not trying to build a general platform. I think Scott Adams actually put this best. He said, in reaction several months ago to what's happening with YouTube, he said we would sort of go towards a Warlord era.
Yeah, that's right.
And the way to think about it is, you have a big core base of viewers on YouTube. Take that, have your own microsite, so that's closed off. Ben Shapiro does this, a bunch of people do this. And, that's enough for you to run your business, ad infinitum. YouTube is a funnel. And, it's a viable strategy for someone who's big. And so that's sort of what Scott Adams was seeing is happening in response to YouTube. And it's, a valid strategy. It's something that makes sense to implement. But it's not solving for YouTube itself. It's more solving for the people that have the luxury of being able to do it.
Yeah.
And it's also starts getting difficult for users. I mean, having just being part of 10 of these, right? So you have a few of these that have popped up. There's Locals. That's
Locals. That's where Robert Barnes and Viva are hanging out. Locals, which I know nothing about except the fact that they're pimping that out. Is that like a float plane? I don't even know what Locals is.
It's so Dave Rubin. He was, he obviously has YouTube censorship. And
Yeah.
his complaints, one of the things he used to say was, I have 1 million subscribers and I don't even have a phone number at YouTube. So, credit for him for doing something about it. And he created this thing called locals. And the idea is creators can create their own microsite. So let's say Ben Shapiro, he has the access to the capital to create his own website with a membership system. Not necessarily every creator does. So locals is sort of a way for those creators to do it. And I think it's invite only, or I'm not sure if you can apply.
Well, if Vivo becomes a member, anyone can become a member. Am I right?
Yeah. Nah, he does really good content. So I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I know.
But
Viva's my friend. I don't have the idea of a little bit of back chat just to harangue him below because he's my friend. I can get away with that.
Yeah. So yeah, like the idea of the Warlord strategy, it works, but it's not solving for, let's have a YouTube that's sort of restored to the the way the golden age of YouTube worked. So that's what we're solving for. So even people that are on, because stuff like locals, they're indirect competitors, like you can be on Utreon, you can be on YouTube, you can be on all these things and have your locals thing and try to enter your monetization through that. In that case, something like Utreon would act as a funnel for you. Now, generally speaking, so we talk to a lot of YouTubers. So for example, we kind of got, I would say, a lot of the gun YouTubers, and more like the history military gun YouTubers. And a lot of them, there were attempts to make these sort of warlord sites or like a platform just for guns, let's say. And the end result is, apart from these things being run relatively incompetently, the result, what they realized is they don't like being in this ghetto, like a website just about that.
Yeah.
The goal is to be on a platform that is credible, that has all kinds of content, and that is what YouTube was originally at its prime. So that's what we're actually working on doing. So you go to utreon.com, you'll see we have, name of the topic, we have stuff like that. So there's a very big diversity of stuff. Rumble, was telling, I think his name's Chris from Rumble, you're going to get you're going to pigeonholed with all of this politics stuff. And, part of that is by the nature of who's affected by what's happening. But I think of all the alternatives, I think we're doing the best job in terms of just having a good diversity.
Well, I do like the user interface, and I also like the fact that I was able to sync all my videos from YouTube directly. That was really nice because I don't have those locally anymore, and just to be able to have somewhere else they're backed up was really, really beneficial. Because my understanding is on Rumble you have to do that manually, and I don't even have them to upload. So presumably I could go into YouTube and re-download them and re-upload them, but your interface did it for free. And I do like what you're doing on your interface in terms of the user design. It's heading in the right direction. So I think there's some real positive things there. So
yeah, and like related videos, for example, YouTube has an algorithm. We say, okay, you want to see videos at random from the entire platform, or do you want to see videos within this topic, or do you want to see videos within the channel? So we make it so the user decides what the algorithm is in terms of what they see.
I would just like it if everyone who's subscribed to me actually gets in their feed. Everyone has notifications gets it in their feed. And when this video, for example, was being put out, that YouTube wasn't like hiding it from my videos page for a while for no particular reason. That's annoying. I like people who actually subscribe to my content be able to get it. That would be helpful.
Yeah, the what's happening with YouTube, in my opinion, is you do have bugs. Those do exist. You do have individual engineers that are, screwing with people behind the scenes. You have corporate policy that probably decides to screw with people. For example, when they say, 90% of the election stuff was corporate content, and we're gonna do better in terms of reducing, the stragglers. That's them saying they have a corporate policy of reducing visibility of stuff. Styx Hexenhammer, he complains about that a lot. Yeah, you just have like a bunch of things happening in terms of them just controlling what's happening. And yeah, in terms of credibility for us, like having a bulletproof notification system, that's just an obvious win.
Absolutely. I think probably the right answer for creators is probably to have at least one or two other things other than the principal one. For if no other reason than you learn things about other platforms and where there are, and there's learning to be done there, and you hedge your bets a little because who knows what the future will bring for YouTube or for anyone else. If I grow and what the future will bring in terms of all the rest of it. So I think what you're doing in terms of your service, you're providing an interface that makes a lot of sense. And the way that you're doing it in terms of being Twitch-like, and one of the disadvantages of Twitch is for reasons that pass understanding, they don't really have old videos. It's only 30 days and then it's gone. I was like, I want to watch a video from 2 years ago. Why can't I watch a video from 2 years ago?
Yeah.
So that's the Twitch disadvantage. But you're trying to integrate the payment system with an open platform with user checked moderation and users checking the moderation and the policies. And so a lot of what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And I think it's worth the time just to try to have something, because we don't know what the future will bring, and just to never know. And then I can be there. I knew the CEO when I was able to have a personal conversation with him. It was him and six guys. I don't know if you ever think about it. You might, but I think of this like old photo of Jeff Bezos when he was working basically in a cubicle, and it has just like Amazon like scrawled on like printer paper. I don't know if you ever saw that photo of like way back in the day when Amazon was like first being invented. And now it's like this huge, obviously, company. It's like, they all start somewhere, so you don't know what the future will bring.
Yeah, our first office was a sardine can, but the Twitch is in terms of like all the platforms, Twitch has the best UI, I think, in terms of competence of doing it, because they only did gaming. They have the best metadata in terms of focusing on gaming. So that's actually a big inspiration for us, obviously. And yeah, like Twitch, even in their frequently asked questions, people are like, what's going to happen to my old videos? And they're like, just upload them to YouTube. Twitch doesn't even care about VOD. Makes sense. They're focused on one thing and they want to do it well. In our case, yeah, we're a VOD platform, and we're looking to implement streaming early in Q1.
Absolutely. Yeah. So who are your biggest users right now on your channel? Who are the biggest users people would know?
Creators, you mean?
Yes, creators. I apologize.
Okay, so with the let's say within firearms, you would have Forgotten Weapons, See an Arsenal. In the legal, you've got Hogue Law. In movies, you've got Cineranter. I'm gonna forget a lot of them.
Fair. Put you on the spot. Who's not going to get love today? That's right.
I mean, there's there's the way all these things work is everything's kind of logarithmic.
Yeah, absolutely.
It starts off really slow. Originally we just had a few channels that served as demos, and then that was by showing those demos that got us more creators. Cool Toy is our first creator. He reviews toy figurines. And so you got those first ones, and that sort of gives you the credibility to get the next ones. And yeah, it's just everything's just snowballing.
Very good. Well, we've been here an hour, and I figure that's a good amount of time for a discussion. And I really appreciate your time, because I know that you're really busy and all the rest of it. So if you have any final thoughts, I'll give you the floor to end us off, and then we'll end the stream.
Well, no, it's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure to talk to you. Pleasure to go over all these topics. They're obviously very timely with what's happening with YouTube. And the way we see it is just going to keep getting worse and worse with YouTube, unfortunately. But we've been sort of preparing the life raft, and our hope is to actually build the most credible YouTube competitor in terms of the tech stack being very modern and robust. We accept 8K video, all this stuff. We consider ourselves ahead of the curve in terms of the tech stack. Having the most thought out systems in terms of moderation. We're going to have our iOS app out soon this month. We're going to have streaming. Our engineer that's dedicated to just getting streaming done, he's gonna scheduled. We hope to have it early in Q1. Our goal is just execution wise to do this right, and to, not be the first video platform, but perhaps be the last.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I like that very much. Well, I'll simply thank my guest. I've been joined by the CEO of Utreon, Edward Brower from Toronto, who is making a run at keeping YouTube accountable. Fight the powerful, fight the man, and then when you reach the top of the escalade, try to avoid becoming the man. That's the real challenge at the end of the day. Once you get the reins of power, trying to avoid being the scourge that you saw. It's we'll just quote Batman at this point. You either die the hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. So we'll try to avoid those fates, I guess. But thanks to Edward for his time, and I'm going to sign off for now. It's been wonderful. Peace and goodbye.
Pleasure.